off, and I'll go home and I'll go for a short run and then come back and get supper going for them. And I was running, it started lightly sprinkling, which when you're running and it's lightly sprinkling, it really feels good. And then it started downpouring. Fortunately, it was not a cold rain, it was a warm rain. But it's great to be here. Tonight's our last Amplified Leadership until after summer. Looking ahead, we've got youth camp coming up in June. We've got Vacation Bible School the last week of August. And we've got a lot of great things that are going on. We have our annual local church conference, which is going to be June 9th. It's the second Tuesday. We are going to serve dinner here. We're going to have a great business meeting. Every 4 years, you get an opportunity to vote on the pastor, and so that is at that time as well. You get to vote on Terry and myself. And so those are some things that we're looking forward to. And we've had a crazy year with COVID and everything. And I've shared this, but Life Church, Craig Rochelle's church, their chief financial officer, or somebody who's in charge of all their facilities, said that their goal when they come back is to come back at 50% and then grow from there. And so Dan Ryland, who was sharing this with a group of pastors, said, so anything above 50%, you're really knocking it out of the park. He said, right now, the national average is 30% of what they were pre-COVID. And so I got some statistics here which are way pre-COVID. So in 1906, 80% of Americans went to church. Not just said they went to church. Some of them probably went 2 times a year, but they attended church. In 2006, 20%. And then in the demographics that came out in 2016, that number was down to 15%. And so one of the latest things that I saw was in Gallup's polling this last year was the first year that people who believed in God or who affiliated as none, they don't go to church anywhere, they don't believe anything, was greater than 50% in America. So 48% of Americans believe in God. And I realize in Ponca City it's higher than that. Even people who don't go to church believe in God. I have people who never go to church and they still ask me for prayer requests and pray this and pray that for them. And so what we do as a church really is not really about putting our name forward, but it's about putting Christ's name forward. And so here's another statistics for us that 6% of churches are growing. It means that they are adding to their attendance. Again, these numbers were pre-2020, because we were looking at 2020, we say, man, the numbers are skewed. 9% are stagnant, which means they're just kind of maintaining, and 85% are in decline. What's a scary statistic is most churches don't grow by leading people to Christ, they grow by transfer growth. And so part of what we're going to talk about tonight, and I might follow up. We're finishing up our Holy Habits this weekend, talking about the holy habit of prayer. But I think I've got another open sermon coming up, and I think I'm going to come back and talk about the habit that's never practiced, and it's the habit of sharing our faith, and how we're called to be that way. We're called to do that. But here's what I want us to know. Every church and every pastor must have a clear vision stating what we need to do in 1 to 3 years to conquer our church, our city for Jesus Christ. So what are we going to do in the next 3 years to transform Ponca City? And so a lot of what we talk about, and what we're going to talk about tonight specifically, and I don't have these in logical order, they're kind of a little bit out of the way, and I apologize for that. But I'm working with a great team of people around me who are doing research and getting things put together. But how do we change our city? And there are events that happen that really help us to draw close to God. And a lot of people say, hey, I want to see revival, but what does that look like? I've got a friend of mine who, back on Christmas Eve, surrendered his life to Jesus. He knew about God, and he'd go to church on occasion. But on Christmas Eve, he surrendered his life to Jesus, works at the refinery, and says, now instead of watching YouTube videos while I'm at work, he goes, I'm reading my Bible. And I'm carrying it around. I'm looking for ways to share my faith with people. But what that brings down to us as a church, first of all, we have to develop a leadership pipeline. We talked about this last time and had some great ideas on how to get this ball moving. I visited with Corbin DeWitt at Pioneer Technology Center because he works with leadership development there, and just talked to him a little bit about what it would look like, how that would work, and we're going to have some more discussions to kind of put out a game plan on how we take people all the way through. And if you look at our transformer track, and that's kind of the last leg where we want to get people to. And we talk about each one of these stages. We want to connect people. And that's where our Sunday morning worship experience is a profound thing in what we do. We want to connect people to Christ. We want to connect people to church. We want to connect people to other godly people, so when you have problems, you can right there connect. We're going to come back and we're going to touch base and develop. We're going to touch base on serve. But we're going to talk about that leadership pipeline. Not everyone who comes to faith in Jesus Christ is going to be a leader in the church. But everyone who comes to faith in Jesus Christ is a valuable member of God's team. And we have to understand that some people are going to rise up and say, man, I feel this call to lead. I feel this call to do something. And others will say, man, I'm really content with stopping at serving. But you know what? We need those people who serve. So here's a funny story. I don't know if it's funny or not, but Asbury is the largest United Methodist church in Tulsa. When Terry and I lived there, it wasn't the largest. It was the third largest. Now it's by far the largest. And they had someone come in 2 weeks ago to talk about them leaving the United Methodist Church and possibly forming the new denomination called Global Methodist Denomination. And for some reason, they sent out a sponsored ad on Facebook, and it hit me here in Ponca City, so I liked it. And because I liked it, then they sent me an invitation to like their page. I thought, well, I'll like their page. So I'm always looking at what other churches are doing. Well, on Friday last week, they had a ministry spotlight, and you clicked on it, and I found out that at Asbury, Tulsa, it takes 500 volunteers to make their church run on the weekend. And so here's the other thing. In conversations I had with Dan Ryland back in 2012, I was able to go to 12 Stone and visit with Dan Ryland, and he said, whatever your goal is attendance-wise, you have to have at least 20% of that in lay ministry. And I'm looking at him, and here's the crazy thing, because that Easter before I met with him, they had 25,000 people in church on Easter. And I looked at him, I said, you had 5,000 volunteers? And he said, we had almost 6,000 volunteers that day. And I'm like, I mean, for me, 6,000 member church is huge. And I'm like, you had 6,000 volunteers. It blew me away. The course where we started Amplify Leadership off of was a course called 24 to Double. And in that, there's a guy that went to a Church of God, Anderson Church down in Louisiana, and the church was about ready to close the doors. He went in there and turned things around. Now it's booming and it's growing. But this is what he says. For every one person who shows up to serve at your church, 4 people will show up to watch them serve. So he goes, if you want to reach people, it's all about developing people. And so, when we talk about leadership, we want people with vision, people who can see, not just now, but 3 years from now. Because we're talking about, in the slide earlier, that every church and every pastor must have a clear vision stating what we need to do in 1 to 3 years to conquer our city for Jesus. So we have to know. So when we talk about people that sit on our leadership team, I'm looking for people who can say, you know what, I can think 3 years in the future. I can think, what is it going to be like to be like that? And so many times we fall short on this is on the execution side of things. Because we can dream big dreams, but when it comes to executing big dreams, it's where it gets tough. So today I sent out to several people and said, where do you see us in 5 years from now? Or yesterday and today. Just wanting to get a text. Where are we going? Where are we moving? What do we want to do? Because all this started from a meeting I had with Dr. Devin Smith. He met with the board. He met with me. And he said, hey, I want you to put the pedal to the metal this year and see what you guys can accomplish. He said, the sky's the limit. You've got great leaders. You've got great momentum at the church. And things are going well. And so let's see what we can do. Let's see where we can go. So in that leadership pipeline, a lot of it is about training people that come in with us. And the number one thing that Devin said to me is, don't do it alone. And I was talking to Jessica Zarovich. She was on the board 4 years ago, my last pastoral review. And she said, Max Koloff came in and he made a great statement. I never realized he made the statement. And I thanked him. I sent him a text and thanked him for it. But he told the board, he said, if you guys want to get to the next level, Mark can't do everything. And he's right, because it feels to me, the less I do, the better the church is. The healthier we are, the better we're able to do things. But, think about every aspect on it. Our first impressions team, we're developing people to lead and to see things that are out there. They're not just opening doors, but they're looking for needs. If you're watching online, you can't understand how cool this is, but it's raining really hard outside right now. And it sounds so cool in the sanctuary until we spring a leak, which I'm praying we don't. But that's what we're doing. So when Ashley's leading worship here, and she's our worship leader, she's training other people as well. This is what it means to go into worship. Not this is how we put on a show, but this is how we authentically worship. And with our ushers, we're training them not just to pass offering buckets, not just to pass communion, but they are connecting with people. And so every aspect of what we do is in that leadership pipeline is when we have people serving, we want to give them the authority to go above and beyond. So my wife and I, when we were first married, we lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we worked we worked two different jobs, which makes sense. But she worked for the Tulsa Philharmonic, and she was an administrative assistant there, and entry-level position. And every once in a while, she'd have to sell tickets, and people would come in, they'd be upset about something or upset about this, and they never gave Terry permission to solve the problem. They said, here's your script, do whatever you can do. But what frustrated her is then they'd say, I want to talk to your supervisor. And they'd go talk to her supervisor, and the supervisor would just give them stuff. And if they talk to the supervisor give them all kinds of stuff. Oh, no, I'll give you this, I'll give you this, I'll give you this. And so for Terry, she's like, man, I felt like a jerk because I couldn't do anything for them, and they come out and they're the heroes. I worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and they enabled me. They actually encouraged me. If someone comes in with a problem, you solve it, because the faster we get a problem solved, the smaller it is. And so I love what John Maxwell says. When we're talking about leadership, every aspect of what we do is leadership. He said, every server at our church, every servant leader at our church carries two buckets. One is gas and one is water. And when you see a fire, you throw one of them on the fire. And so we, in training and developing, one of the things is we develop people is, and here's where I fall prey to, and here's where I need help with, and you guys can help me out with this. Sometimes I assign people the position, and I forget about the position. I'm like, oh, it's covered. And I was reading some stuff, and they're like, man, you gotta continue to find out what's going on. How can we make it better? How's this going? How's that going? That's all a part of our leadership pipeline where you guys can say, hey, Mark, you haven't checked in over here. We need help here. We need help here. It's how we're going to get to the next level. Great story of how Mark doesn't realize sometimes that things are going on. Back when we were at Brookfield, we had a custodian, and I come in every once in a while, and I'm like, it just doesn't look very clean in here. And so I had a conversation with her, and in my conversation, this is what she told me. She says, well, the vacuum cleaner doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work. And I'm like, man, what You tell me. She goes, well, I've been bringing mine from my home, and sometimes if my mom has to use it, I can't bring it. I said, we will buy you a vacuum cleaner. I am so sorry. I felt bad about it. And Terry told her, said, no, you just got to tell Mark because he doesn't know this stuff's going on. Anything bad, you got to tell him, hey, this is happening so we can get things solved. But it comes down to giving people permission to say, hey, this isn't working. Or maybe this can work better. We've privileged to have some youth join us in the back. What I love about teenagers is they see the world differently than adults do. And sometimes you guys see things that we don't see and pick up on stuff. And at Connect Church, you have permission to come in and say, hey, we could do this better. And so I hope you guys realize that you have that opportunity because that's what makes us great. So we have leadership pipeline. We're going to talk about discipleship pathway, and Tana is taking the ball and running with this, and I appreciate this because this is really an area for me that is tough to get traction. There's so many details that are involved in it and how to get things to work, and once I get more than 3 details, I'm just like, check out, oh man, it just blows me away, which is, why we have valuable people like Tana, why we have valuable people like my wife here who help me with details because I don't get that stuff. But the goal isn't simply growing our attendance or even getting a person saved. Our goal is creating a disciple. Our goal isn't just to get people to walk through the doors. We want people to walk through the doors. We love it when new people walk through the doors. We love it when people get saved. We love it when people get baptized. But our goal is to turn them into a reproducing Christian. So, Todd Bollinger wrote a book called, what's it called? Can't remember. I read it this last year with the district pastors and everything, and he talked about the greatest thing in a church is reproduction. He said, if you're not reproducing things, then everything becomes drudgery. And so what we need to do is a church, it's called canoeing the mountains. What we need to do as a church is look for how we can reproduce life. In marriage, husbands and wives, they get together, and then after a few years, they're like, hey, we need to reproduce ourselves. And there's something about it. There's something cool about it. There's an excitement. I mean, usually when it maybe kids 6, 7, or 8, you're not excited about it. But usually when you're just like, hey, we're expecting a child, there's an excitement about it. You're like, wow, this is really cool. Especially when you're expecting number 1, you're expecting number 2, and it goes on. You're like, man, each one is a new experience. And it's the same way in church when we're reproducing. So I've got this, I'm jumping around my notes a little bit. So I got this quadrant to kind of tell us, what is a disciple? A disciple is one who is saved. So first check mark, if you want to follow Jesus, you have to be saved. You have to ask Jesus to come into your life and forgive you your sins. One who is living a spirit-filled life. What does that word spirit-filled mean? Spirit-filled is saying that I no longer make my decisions, but I've asked God to come in and make decisions for me. So there was a great book that came out. It's a classic Christian book called In His Steps. And in that book, the people at a certain church decided they were going to ask themselves a question for any major decision. And the question was, what would Jesus do? And so before that book came out, that question wasn't out there. Now it's huge. You can go buy bracelets that say WWJD. But the Spirit-filled life says that God is guiding me, God is directing me, and He's the one who tells me what to do. A disciple is one who is actively doing the works of ministry. And so a disciple is somebody who serves in the local church. They look for ways to get involved. They want to be involved. They want to use their giftedness. And then a disciple is one who is in the local church. And so that's important because so many times people say this to me, I love Jesus, I just don't like church. And it's a gut check for me because at times I'm like, man, we as a church are supposed to be the bride of Christ. Are we perfect? No, we're made of a bunch of misfits. But we should be looking for ways to serve people and show people the love of Jesus. Because again, if we go back to our Transformer track, we are trying to get people to the developed stage. They've connected, they come to church, they enjoy our worship, they enjoy the donut holes, they enjoy the coffee, they enjoy hanging out with us, and that's all great. Those are all a great step, but it doesn't mean anything if we don't start developing them in Christ. So, brand spanking new news. Saturday, May 8th, we're going to have a men's breakfast here at Connect Church. And we're going to talk about next steps. We're going to be doing breakfast with the men. And we'll talk about where we want to meet, what we're going to do. That first one will be here. I'll be making pancakes. I'll be recruiting some other people to make some other stuff to go along with it. But May 8th, 8 o'clock. And the reason is we want to develop people. We want people to fall in love with Jesus. And so, Tana, here was what I was telling you about, a pictogram. And this doesn't have to be our church. This is another church, and this is what they said is, we have the three things: connect to a living God, connect to other people, connect to an abundant life. At their church, their three things are love God, love people, and serve the world. But in that, you can see where they're getting people to come in. So love God, worship, salvation, baptism, prayer, love people. It's about life group. It's about small groups, about getting connected with people, and it's about getting in discipleship. And that's all about sending people out into the world. Sending people out into the world. When the girls came back from the IF conference, they talked about how we need to be a sending church, not a come and see church. And that's what it comes down to, is sending people out there, getting people out in the mission field, because that's where the lost are. That's where the hurting people are. That's where the dysfunction is. And so I'm working on my challenge for our annual local church conference, our annual business meeting, and just putting out feelers. Where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? What do we want to see happen? And God's been moving in an amazing way in our church. And because God moves, great things take place. And so all along this, and you see, I actually have this a little bit out of whack, because if we were to put this in order, discipleship pathway would be the number one thing. The number one thing we want to do is we want people to grow in their faith in Jesus Christ. And as they grow in their faith in Jesus Christ, then as they get saved, say, hey, you want to come in, you want to volunteer? We have volunteer positions in our church that require a lot of skill, and we have some volunteer positions that don't require a whole lot of skill. And I'm not just going to walk up to somebody one Sunday morning and say, hey, I've never met you before, but do you want to teach a Sunday school class? That requires a little bit of a skill set. Sometimes if I ask you to teach a Sunday school class, I tell you it's a life sentence. But we have other positions at church that the only skill you need to have is be able to smile and say, welcome to Connect Church. And it's so much fun when we do that. People tell me all the time how much they enjoy their welcome at Connect Church. I had a friend of mine who went to several churches around town. He said, every church does the exact same thing, but you guys actually enjoy it. And I'm like, that's good. He goes, everybody gives you the information. They give you a bulletin. He goes, but you actually have people who want to answer your questions. Part of it is because we hide the men's restroom. And guys have to ask us, hey, how do I find the men's room? We hide the women's restroom. It's a little bit hidden too, but the men's restroom is very hidden. But see, this comes down to, on our Transformer track, is getting people involved in serving. When we serve, that's what God has called us to do. Terry and I were talking about someone. They don't go to church here, but still not going to tell you their name. And over the last few years, has become very self-involved. Lives in another city, lives in another thing. And we tend to become self-involved when we stop serving other people. I tease my parents from time to time. They attend Barnesville First Wesleyan Church. They have a Sunday school class that's about 40 or 50 people in their Sunday school class, and nobody in their Sunday school class likes their teacher. But here's the funny thing about their Sunday school class. In that Sunday school class of 40 to 50 people, all of them are retired pastors. And I was like, why don't you guys teach it? Well, we can't do that. I'm like, yeah, you can. I'm pretty sure you guys all have pastoral degrees. Oh, you're not qualified to teach the class. Here's the other thing I know about when we get involved in serving. We become less critical, and we become more loving. And that's where God wants us to be. I know this was kind of a me rambling session tonight, and I apologize for that. You guys have any, let me see if I can pop that up there. The three things I talked about. Maybe someone might have a question about one of those three things. We talked about the leadership pipeline. We talked about the discipleship pathway. And we talked about volunteer engagement. Do you have any questions about those, or how those fit in, or how are we going to accomplish that? Great question, Sawyer. Thank you. Sawyer asked, what exactly does engagement mean? So not only do I want to recruit you for a position, but I want you to be engaged to where you're looking for ways that you can make that better. So we're not a cookie cutter that says, hey, this is the way we've always done things. You have to do exactly the way we want them done. I want to free you up to do things creatively and say, man, I've got a lot of permission here to be creative about this. I don't want to lock you in and say you can only do it this way. We're not a box church that says we only do things this way every time. An example of that was when Ashley and I first met over in Blackwell, and when she came over and joined our worship band over at Brookfield, she made a comment to Terry one time. She goes, hey, who picks out the music? And Terry goes, Mark does. And Ashley goes, okay. And she didn't want to step on my toes. She didn't want to offend me. But I hated picking out music. And so every Tuesday, Terry would send me text after text. Have you picked out music yet? We're not going to pick out music. Will you please pick out the music? Come on, pick out music. I need you to pick out the music. And I understand how things go together as far as when I say how things go together. I know what the same key is. So I can look at music and say, oh, this music is in the same key as this music, and I can put it together that way. But as far as having a flow to it, and then the other complaint, somebody who's not here, we won't mention her name, Terry, is that I'd get a favorite song and we'd sing it like every 2 or 3 weeks. And so when Ashley comes up and she goes, hey, I don't want to step on your toes. I don't want to offend you. If I'm not allowed to, just tell me that I'm not allowed to. I'm not sure how things are done here. But would it offend you if I picked out the music? And I'm like, God bless you. Go in peace. When Kenneth came here to lead the youth, he wanted to know, how much freedom do I have? I'm like, you got a lot of freedom. And he goes, what if I change things that you do? And I'm like, oh, please do change things that I do. I'm stuck in a rut. When we recruit people for ministry, and I'm still learning on this. I'm still learning on this. Even on boards, I went through and read how I could be a better pastor, even with my board, but saying, man, I'm not in this by myself. And I have other people, ideas, other people who have juices flowing. And Tana made the comment a couple board meetings ago. She goes, wow, the staff really seems tired. I'm like, we are tired. But it's true. So yeah, great question. All that started from volunteer engagement. We want you, when you volunteer, to have a freedom to make things better. Any other questions? I'm excited. Tana's been working hard at developing our discipleship pathway, and I'm excited about what that's going to be. She teased us a little bit about it at board meeting, and she's working on it, and I'm excited. I just great things are ahead for us. So, without further ado, you guys have a good evening, and I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for joining us online. Thank you guys for joining us here in person.